Hey everybody, today we're joined by Kingsley Ndoh, founder and CEO at Hurone AI, an AI firm focused on empowering clinicians and patients with personalized and scalable AI copilots, driving a 50% reduction in oncologist workloads, a 95% protocol compliance, and a 95% patient satisfaction rate. Kingsley graduated from the University of Washington after graduating medical school in Nigeria. Since graduating, Kingsley has worked with notable causes initiatives and firms, including the Global Oncology Group with Fred Hutch, the 3 times Nobel Prize winner, and was one of the experts called in for the President's Cancer Panel for Cancer Technologies, among others we may have time to get into on the call. Kingsley, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jose.
So tell us, what's the story behind Hurone? How did you get to building this?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Nigeria, and when I was in medical school, just shortly after graduating, my very close aunt was diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and unfortunately, it was a late stage colorectal cancer. And I just saw her suffer. She misdiagnosed for over a year before it was caught, and unfortunately, she passed on. That really inspired me to, want to train in oncology, want to do something essentially. And that's what led me to want to come to the United States. I came to University of Washington. As you read in my bio, as you kindly read, I ended up working at Fred Hutch in global oncology initiatives. But the key thing that really led me to start Hurone AI was a book I had read in 2017. It's called Humans Need Not Apply by Jerry Kaplan. In this book, it was talking about, Jerry Kaplan was talking about the different advances in AI in different industries, potentials for healthcare. And one of the things he talked about that struck me was the very delayed adoption of AI in healthcare. A lot of industries were really moving at a fast pace in transforming those industries, but healthcare was one that was really lagging behind. But the paradox is healthcare has the most data of any industry. And for obvious reasons, it's very sensitive data, and it was not really poised as malleable to change as other industries were. So that really got me thinking around how in oncology we have all this data, from social determinants of health data to genomics to clinical notes that patients would have when they encounter clinicians, and just figuring out how we can create more precision-based treatments from that data using AI. It's got me to think about how we can augment overworked oncologists to make their workflows easier, prescribe the best treatments, the best personalized treatments for their patients, especially in an ecosystem where there are guideline updates every month sometimes, or new research that could impact their treatment they offer to their patients. And this is just a lot of data that is sometimes humanly impossible to deal with. So thinking about how we can bring all that together to provide the best care for patients, that's what got me thinking of Hurone. And I eventually founded the company early 2022. And Hurone is a Spanish word for ferret. So Huron without the E. And, ferret is variegated in color. It's white, black, and brown. And this, stands for expansive data sets that can eventually lead to precision oncology. And the ferret is mostly used for medical research.
Wow, that is a very nuanced place to get a name for a company. And once you explain it, it's like, wow, that's nuanced. Okay, well, in terms of like the impact that Huron is having, it seems like it's clearly working. The 50% reduction in oncologist workloads, that genuinely saves lives. But like,
Absolutely.
can you explain to us why there is an issue with oncologist workloads to begin with?
Yeah, I think a good place to start is looking at the disparity in outcomes in different ecosystems here in the United States. So there are essentially two types of cancer centers. We have the NCI designated cancer centers, or the National Cancer Institute designated comprehensive cancer centers. So you want to view these cancer centers as one that is connected to university, so is academic. They have many oncologists, many staff, and all the latest equipment in diagnostics and in treatment. And then we have the other set of cancer centers, which is called the community cancer centers, which will be ones that are non-academic, but they give good care. A lot of studies have found is that the outcomes are very different. So patients who would go to community cancer centers, they have some studies cite up to a 30% higher mortality risk than those who go to academic cancer centers. And essentially 80% of Americans, that's about 1.4 million, cancer patients who go to these community centers. And the community centers also have fewer oncologists and they tend to have 3 times more workload than academic cancer centers. So what Hurone AI is doing is seeing how we can close this gap. And one of the major reasons why there's this huge disparity in outcomes is the fact that the community oncology centers are not as equipped as the academic cancer centers to know when there's a deviation in protocol or there's a new clinical trial result that just came out that will impact patient care. Those academic cancer centers are implementing it because they're the ones that actually did the clinical trials. They fed that information to the cancer guidelines. And so they're very much equipped to know what is happening because it's a very research heavy environment. But there's a lag in translation from this new research to patient care. And so what Hurone AI is doing, you can think about it as an oncologist best buddy, right? A digital oncologist, whereby an oncologist is, they are trained, they're taking care of their patients, but they have this intelligent co-pilot that runs in real time with the latest guidelines, with any relevant clinical research, is looking at the patient holistically with any other comorbidities, not just the cancer, because, a patient could have cancer, they could have heart disease at the same time. There's some drugs you might want to use to ensure that you're not exacerbating the heart disease, all that. So our co-pilot really helps oncologists in real time to run through all this data and produce treatment options for their patients with pros and cons, rationale, relevant references, a lot of explainability, and then patients and their oncologists can pick what treatment to take. And to your first question, or to your first point of reducing the workload of oncologists, in the midst of all that, we're improving care. We're also automating a lot of the workflow. So a lot of things like even just data retrieval. Oh, what was the thyroid stimulating hormone scores? You can just ask it with voice and it talks back to you. So it's like you have this digital oncologist working in collaboration with a human oncologist to provide much better patient care and streamlined workflows.
Right. And it sounds like you're empowering everybody to have the right information at the right time to make the best decisions possible. And it sounds like right now the problem is that oncologists, although they do great work and they really know what they're doing, they just don't have potentially the time, the bandwidth to actually go out and update or stay up to date as they should be, or maybe can be, on the
Yes.
most recent studies, which again can save somebody's life. This is actually really different to what I've heard other people do with oncology AI. It seems like some people are focusing on just, when you're looking when you're doing your studies and you're doing your scans, you're looking for the tumors, right? No, I'm just sharing how I understand it, right? So correct me if I'm ever wrong. The ability to find those, it takes time, maybe like 2 hours, right? To actually sit down and review everything. So some people are focusing on just that, on accelerating that part of the process. But it sounds like you're not focusing there. You're so much more focusing on the base level intelligence or understanding details of the actual doctor. So describe to me, like, why this approach?
Yeah, so we have companies, like you rightly said, we have companies that are already looking at diagnostics, AI in diagnosis. And, AI has a huge role there. When, for example, if a woman does her first mammogram at 40, there are AI platforms that can read that and even predict the future risk of breast cancer in that woman. There are companies that are looking at the hallmark of diagnosis in cancer is pathology. So you do a biopsy, prepared and viewed under a microscope to see if there are cancer cells.
Right.
So that's the hallmark. But all that, computer vision can augment in making that diagnosis, even writing the reports and all that. So where we come in is after the diagnosis have been made. Now you have to choose precision treatments for this patient so that they can have the best outcome. And if you line 5 women that were all diagnosed with breast cancer, they might have totally different diseases.
Really?
because, yes, because there's a biological subtype. There might be receptors that are different, all that. And so that's why cancer is one of the most complex diseases, because it's not just like, oh, this person has a myocardial infarction. Is universal. The pathology of myocardial infarction is very similar across board. But if someone says, oh, they have breast cancer, you want to find out, is it triple negative breast cancer? Is it ERPR positive? Is it HER2, HER2 positive? It's all of that. It's you can have, and they're all different treatment approaches. And then you have to also consider other comorbidities. Comorbidities are if there are any other existing illnesses in that person. So, if a woman, for example, is pregnant, you have to figure out the baby, you have to figure out, or
Right.
if, she still wants to make babies, and then you want to figure out what you're going to do, because chemo and some other cancer drugs can be toxic to ovulation, can disrupt ovulation. So you have to think about a lot of things holistically in addition to the cancer biology itself. And this is where being in an academic center really arms you, because this is research you're doing, all the protocols and stuff. But in other centers, they might not, there are lags, and this is also very useful in academic centers too, because it just streamlines it, right? You don't need to check anywhere. Those guidelines are really complicated. There's research coming out every time. So essentially, you're working with a digital oncologist, but the difference between you and that digital oncologist is that it's plugged into your patient data and it's plugged into a lot of the resources that's going to help you to make the right decisions. And you know that as medicine is practiced here in the US, you're not just as a physician, you're not just saying this is what's going to happen, this is how we're going to treat you. Your job is to present the best options that are available for that patient, discuss with the patient, and empower the patient to make a decision with you on on how to go. And that's essentially what we do.
Right. So it sounds like it is in a way like adding on a superpower to the oncologist to have all so much data and so much research at the reach of your fingertips, right there, whenever you need it. So I guess one of the things that comes to mind is like, okay, so depending on the model that you're using, the foundational model for the AI, you could potentially have hallucinations. So I'm wondering how well you guys, because it seems like you guys have figured out 95% compliance rate. How will you guys go about making sure that it's still correct?
Yeah. So in the beginning, yes, there were quite a lot of hallucinations, but we've worked really hard. And one of the cloud providers we use or the major cloud provider we use is AWS. We built an AWS Bedrock, and there's just so much engineering that has gone into limit hallucinations to the barest minimum. I wish my chief product officer was here. He would have given you all the technical terms of what they've done.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we're doing with the centers we're working with, like with UCSF, is to validate, look at the outputs and score it and see how relevant it is to treatments, and to make sure that there is not making up stuff. And the
Right.
way we're also going about it is to continually get feedback to see if there's something that might have deviated, and then we have to kind of fix on the back end. But for the most part, in the beginning, when we first built it, yes, we definitely had hallucinations. But right now, it's not zero, but it's very, very minimal. And one other guardrail is the doctor would also look through. There's also rationale, and then there are references. So if there's a hallucination with the clinical, just the clinical experience of that oncologist, you know that, okay, no, I'm not going to do this, right? And then we make sure that that is also logged, so that we know that this was not done because of this.
Right. So there's a constant feedback loop with the oncologist, real time actually using it. And then you have the product team making sure that the natural hallucinations that were more of an issue in previous models now are mostly removed, which is phenomenal, honestly. Phenomenal. So I'm wondering, like, how are you guys rolling this out? How many you'd want to get this into the hands of every single oncologist in the entire nation, in the entire world, right?
Yes. I wish we could just do it like this and it's all there. But as you know, it's a very regulated industry, especially when you're dealing with clinical decision support, which is kind of what we're doing. And so we're in the process of FDA 510K approval to make our device or our platform able to kind of roll it out to the different players. We have a long pipeline of centers waiting based on our initial results, and we're going to still be publishing more later this year as we go through the FDA process. But yeah, we're definitely looking forward to having this in the hands of, and honestly, a lot of oncologists that have tried it are really excited. They can't wait to use it in their daily practice.
Phenomenal. I can only imagine. When I was coding back in the day, only like 2-3 years ago, when these LLMs first came out and splashed onto the scene, I was like, okay, I can't really work without this anymore. So I can only imagine how an oncologist feels, even who's
Exactly.
even more overburdened by what they have to do. And you were working with John Hopkins and alongside UCSF on this like initial launch, right?
Yeah, so Johns Hopkins is the second institution that are going to be joining our pilot site. UCSF, we've been working with them since last year. Johns, and I can tell you, there's a pipeline of people joining. So we're really excited about that. At UCSF, we're working with we're using that the Brain Tumor Center. Now, cancers in general are very complex, but one of the
Right.
most complex cancers, as you might imagine, is the different types of brain cancers. That's just
Right.
because the brain is the most complex organs in the body. So, looking at that from both a patient and oncologist point of view, and, a lot of brain cancer patients too, their first go through, mostly they'll go through surgery, depending, and then there's all sorts of other therapies that will follow from there, from radiation to chemo to multiple imagings and all that. So it's really great working with them, because one of the things with UCSF, especially with state of California in general, is there's a lot of rural parts of California, and there are affiliate hospitals that feeds into UCSF, the UCSF system. And one of the things I hear a lot is neurosurgeons telling me, or other oncologists saying, Kingsley, I wish this patient was managed a certain way before they were referred. So you can see that this would be good for all the ecosystem, because at the very least, you can provide the best care for your patient, and then before you even refer to like a tier 1, cancer center. The other thing is, a lot of cancer centers are moving towards value-based care contracts. And the original way that care is reimbursed in this country is, you do this service, you see this person, and these are the fees, and that's what insurance will pay. But now it's being flipped, right? Looking at it like, okay, how well are you implementing a certain guideline? How well is your patient doing for this treatment you offered? Those are the kind of quality measures that are going to be looked at for reimbursement models. And so this is why this is quite attractive. The other thing that you hear from even CFOs of small cancer clinics, or even maybe mid-sized healthcare systems, is that they also want to manage risk. These places have a much higher probability of being sued, for malpractice, or something went wrong. And if they're reporting, they're doing their quarterly meeting, they can say, okay, this is the amount because of, in a perfect world where, let's say, Hurone AI is running that system, they'll be like, okay, well, this actually helped us to follow guidelines to their extent. Or if they're sued, you have all that data to face the courts. But
Right.
at the very heart of it is to provide the best care to all patients. And that's really the goal, so that we can have this sort of like almost level playing ground, where you shouldn't have a worse outcome just because of where you went, especially when we have the technology that can mitigate that.
Right. And if anything, this really does, in a way, democratize great health service in a lot of ways. Now, it's really interesting that you're thinking about these different key decision makers along the way, of course, right? Like a CFO of a small center. But I bet they have very similar, if not the same, basically worries as ones at larger centers. So I'm wondering, like, what sort of, you also mentioned, by the way, like these federal regulation, FDA, right? So you have to go through all of these hurdles, through all these people, just to change people's lives. I'm wondering, like, how do you go about that? How are you feeling about that? Right? I know it's a loaded question, isn't it?
It is a
But
loaded question.
I would love to hear how you see the healthcare industry right now in terms of like the hurdles?
So as you know, as you can imagine, healthcare in America is the most complex anywhere on planet Earth. And there are different players you have to deal with. And, it's just part of it's just one of those things you have to deal with as an entrepreneur, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to make sure that, you're running a sustainable business, one that is having impacts in people's lives, and one that you're doing the right thing. Patient data, clinical decision support, all this is quite regulated. You want to make sure that it's protected, cybersecurity is checked, HIPAA is complied with, any regulatory that you have to pass through, and it's expensive, obviously, to go through all these hoops. But the goal is you're making sure that every incentive to every player is being met. For patients, they're getting the best care. For clinicians, they're spending less time and doing better. For community oncology centers, they're not breaking the bank. They're not saying, oh, because for us to put this technology through, then it just kind of wipes out our budget. So you have to figure all that out. For us to go to market, then we have to deal with investors as well. Right now we're in the midst of raising a seed round. We've only raised the pre-seed, and this is where we are. So now we're raising a seed round to scale this. But in general, you have to deal with all that. And again, I'm not doing it alone. I have an amazing team. We have a partnership lead that also helps with a lot of the pipeline we're developing. We have FDA consultants, helping the whole process. So it's a team that makes this happen. But again, as a startup, it's not like your big corporate entity that you have different departments dealing with this. So as a startup, it keeps you up at night. It keeps you on your toes, because every day you wake up as a startup founder is your brain is wired to just solve the next problem. Okay, let's see how we can solve this. And that's how we go. And the more problems you're solving, you're taking steps to your destination.
Right. Right. And that really is how it is. I mean, to take on the health industry, that's, of course, it takes, for lack of a better word, I'll bleep this out. It takes, right. It takes courage, it takes bravery. It's amazing that you've created something that actually helps, right? And not with the most complicated, it doesn't sound like you're revolutionizing AI by default. It's just using the tools that are available to actually fix a problem. And amazing. So in terms of your past work, I'm really interested about this work that you've done with Fred Hutch and with the President's Cancer Panel. So how did that work inspire you in any way to move in this direction?
Yeah, so while I was in Fred Hutch was one of those places, and it still is, that had people that just had a more global look at oncology and not just dealing with cancer here in the US. And, they saw that value that if you can study cancers in other parts of the world, it can benefit a lot of Americans. So I'll give you an example. While I was in Fred Hutch, one of the things our group was working on and I was involved in was a cancer called Burkitt's lymphoma. Burkitt's lymphoma is a type of lymphoma, is a childhood cancer for the most part, and it's caused by an infection of Epstein-Barr virus, or EBV. But for reasons unknown, there's just hypothesis that states why this is so. The disease occur 10 degrees north. 90% of the cases are seen 10 degrees north and south of the equator. Yeah, so 90% is of cases. And then the cases that are seen here in the US is just sporadic. So there's no how. It's very difficult to do any clinical trial, like then wanted to trial like a vaccine for EBV that could prevent. So if you're not studying it where the cancer is, then you cannot really find therapies here in the US, because you don't have enough numbers to do that kind of research. And so those are the kind of things that, that inspired me, that sometimes you have to look beyond our geographical region to figure things out. There's also more genetic diversity in Africa, for example, and you might find some mutations that you've never seen here. You could find, for example, breast cancer tend to be more aggressive. The aggressive type tends to happen more in Black women, and you might study that better in a place like Africa and, bring those here. So those are the kind of things that, inspired me and just opened my eye in Fred Hutch. When it comes to the President's Cancer Panel, so the President's Cancer Panel is an institutionalized panel that was founded in 1971 by the then president, and every administration would appoint members and a chair of that panel. And these members, they're usually three members constitutionally. And job is to essentially look at certain things that are really important in the cancer space in the US and advise the president and the National Cancer Plan. And so the last President's Cancer Panel was made up of three distinguished clinicians from your neck of the hood at MSD. Yeah. Dr. Brown, Carol Brown, at medical oncologist at Johns Hopkins, and one at UCSF. So, anyways, they came together because one of the major things that was a pressing area to really understand the landscape is the use of emerging technologies in cancer patient navigation. So they had to bring advisors, senior advisors to work on that. And so that's how I got involved in that project. But it really gave me a window to what was happening because we talked to the leading researchers around the country from some of the top institutions. We brought big tech companies, Google, all the big tech companies to kind of provide a perspective because the technology is moving so fast and we were looking at, okay, what's the best ways to implement it? What are the recommendations for companies? So those are kind of things we were looking at. And we submitted that report and also looking at funding, reimbursing, if we have these technologies and they can be reimbursed, then how the patients actually gain from those technologies. And so, yeah, and a lot of the recommendations have been, CMS approved cancer navigation technologies as reimbursable, all those things are happening from the report. And, the viewers can, they can just Google President's Cancer Panel, cancer navigation technologies. It will come up. Yeah, so I was really proud of that work because it's really like a blueprint for a lot of what is happening right now in emerging technologies around cancer and policies surrounding it.
Right, and I would be proud of it too. I mean, that's honestly amazing to me. And I guess very notably, the Biden administration had the cancer moonshot, so they were really doubling down into that area.
Yes.
So a couple of questions, kind of expanding from that. It sounds like your past experiences, where you also studied medicine as well, kind of give you like that global perspective, and then the cancer navigation systems or services that the Biden administration was really looking into or was looking to support kind of gave you this direction to an extent, or maybe you already were on that direction. Now,
Yes.
if we were to combine both, I'm wondering, is it on the roadmap at some point for Huron to then go multilingual? Because it is becoming much easier in a lot of ways to switch languages in a base model. Could actually then expand global access just via Copilot with an internet access to a remote data center for people wherever to actually have access to the latest and greatest.
Yeah, so you're actually revealing a lot of our, some of our product vision. But yeah, we definitely want to make it very linguistically responsive. Spanish is one of the first languages we want to add, especially it's almost like that's one of especially in California, right? Like Spanish is really big there. So, but we definitely want to have like major languages for the platform. Besides, our first market segment is obviously the US, and there's a lot that's going to happen for us to really penetrate the market. But we're also going to be looking at internationally for growth. And we've already tested this in Africa. So we've proved that it can work, although it's a version, you have to be contextual with this technology. So the version we tested in Africa was very contextual and tailored to where we piloted, and it was in their language in Rwanda. So Rwanda was the first place we piloted. And the V1 or the prototype of the product could be translated in Kinyarwanda, which was a language that Rwandese speak. And the reason why we piloted there was because it was an easy, kind of low-hanging fruit. We could learn a lot there. And companies like Zipline, believe it or not, the first piloted in Rwanda. So we're probably in their footsteps as well.
Interesting. Okay. So I guess what I can potentially foresee here is that all these different countries, they have their own way of managing data nationally, locally. So it becomes a matter of, okay, how do you end up navigating those different data storage systems or is this actually now and paving the way for an international standard if there isn't already? Maybe I'm just ignorant to it. It's an international standard for data collection of health data.
Absolutely, and that's actually one of the things that makes us stand out. We're fortunate to be fine tuning, applying machine learning techniques with data from UCSF under a very strict data sharing agreement. Which, at some point you will face situations where a treatment fails. What do? You have to learn from historic data, patient data, even to predict what a patient might need or what kind of side effects may occur. You need machine learning. So that's another, and having access to international data from data sharing agreements sort of enriches your data to really provide precision care. Like I said, Huron is coming from that ferret that have different colors, and if we can have data from the US and different sources, that can produce a much more robust platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I can imagine that this paving the way towards some sort of international standard and some sort of basically more diverse data set. I think, if anything, that could solve what has been an inherent bias issue in AI, especially in the medical fields, because it has been historically Anglo-Saxon white, right? Like Anglo-Saxon males,
Yeah.
where we have the most data, right? So in many ways, this could open up potentially, like in software, there's this idea of edge cases, right? So we have now, algorithm or whatever it is, and then we apply it, and then there are edge cases within data that we have to handle. Edge cases to the applied research that can open up potentially like an entirely new door, entire new realm of what's like post, I guess, international testing of research. I personally wouldn't know what's in through that door, but I can see there's something there, right?
That's the same thinking from what you're bringing from software is the same thing in medicine as well. Yeah.
Right, I can imagine. It might be a STEM approach, right? Because it's an overall like scientific approach to an extent. So, okay, we're basically at time, kind of going over time, but it was a fascinating conversation so far. One last question. If there's anything that you want to leave the audience, the listeners with before we jump off.
Yeah, I'll say that whether Huron does it or not, and we're pushing that frontier, that one of the major areas that AI is going to make a huge difference in the lives of people is in healthcare in general. And cancer care is one of the most complex, or cancer as a whole and oncology as a specialty is one of the most complex specialties, because you're dealing with different genetic types, different exposures, and just different things. It's very complex. When someone gets a diagnosis of cancer, it's huge toll on families and the people themselves. And as we getting into a world where we absolutely have no choice than to merge big data, AI, and humans working symbiotically to provide better care. And it would be a disservice to patients and to just the healthcare ecosystem if it's just so clear that having that symbiotic relationship produces better quality care. And in clinical trials, if you're trying out a drug, if one drug, a drug and a combination of something is better than the status quo, it would be almost unethical not to use what is better. And that's where we're heading. That's the frontier we're heading with in AI in healthcare, and what Hurone AI is doing in cancer care. And we're really looking forward to transforming this field and making lives better.
I'm looking forward to it too. And looking forward to what you all do in the world, because this is truly so transformative, I believe. Well, Kingsley, thank you for your time. Thank you for being a guest here. And if anything, I'll connect you to Fema, the other oncologist in the UK, trying to do something very similar
Yeah, I
to
love
you.
that. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well,
Thank you so
until
much.
the next one, everybody.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah. Take care.